9:20. We're talking about the comments by James Heappey, the Defence Minister, about Ukraine being perfectly entitled to attack targets inside Russia. Do you agree with him? Sebastian is in Fulham. Hello, Sebastian.
Hello, good evening, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to say?
Well, I think it was totally irresponsible of this man, totally irresponsible, clearly on orders to do so. But I just think that a lot of these guys, they don't realise that sending these poor Ukrainians into as cannon fodder against the Russians, who clearly are much stronger on the ground. And we might be winning the information war within our own echo chambers, but the reality is on the ground, the Russians have absolutely cleaned up. They've got superior firepower, and their strategy hasn't been to occupy. It's been really to encircle and to wait it out, because they've got the resources, they've got the manufacturing base to make weapons and make ammunitions, which they supply by train, and that just keeps on coming through. And one of your last speakers was talking about, I think the second lady was asking why they haven't targeted all the ammunition that we're sending through. None of that stuff is getting through. This is mostly propaganda. Anything that comes through,
how do you know that?
Taken out. Oh, well,
how do you know that?
I don't live in the echo chamber, let's just say that.
All right, but where do you live then?
No, well, I mean, there's different ways to get this information. You can either rely on mainstream sources. I'm telling you now, you can rely on mainstream sources, or you have your own sources who are on the ground over there who are telling you what's going on, in real time. There's different journalists as well, which are covered on channels like open source channels like YouTube, for example, who are very, very well-known people who also give their own accounts of it. But my point is, you can't.
But how do you judge that? How do you judge that they are providing accurate information?
Well, if you look at it this way, I mean, if Russia was in such a state, and they, everybody would like us to believe that the Russians are losing this war and they're losing badly. Why is it that it is us who keep on pumping out all this, sort of false flag information about chemical weapons and all sorts of things? It's always us who are pumping this stuff out, and it's very annoying.
I don't recall any accusation that chemical weapons have been used.
No, it keeps coming out of Victoria Nuland and Anthony Blinken, and, they keep talking about the likelihood when, we look at Mariupol, for example, the Russians have circled it, and there's the Azov-style base that's there, which clearly there's some people are very, some very important people in that place that have been circled, and they won't come out, even though they've been given passage to come out. And yet it is us saying that...
But you would accept the Russians have often said, yes, we'll give you passage, and then people try to take advantage of that, and then they're shot dead.
What source is that? Where that's
well, we've seen the evidence. We've seen the evidence on the BBC News.
Is this the same BBC News that is? Is this the same BBC News that is? Sorry, Ian, can I make the point?
Go on.
Is it the same BBC News that was telling us that there were chemical weapons attacks in Syria, which were proven later to have been staged, or the same BBC News that was very actively propagating that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and went on pretty much acres and acres and months of proving that there were weapons of mass destruction.
First of all, there were chemical weapons used in Syria. We can debate Iraq all you like, but that was nearly 20 years ago now. Are you seriously telling me that you would believe random YouTube observers are not journalists that work for the BBC and have got the filmed evidence of these attacks?
Yes. Because they also have filmed. Yes, because they also have evidence. Look up Eva Bartlett. Look up Alexander. The Duran. They're very, very good, and they've got evidence on that. These guys are proper investigative journalists rather than people living in the echo chamber pumping out what Liz Truss asked them to pump out.
Oh, please. You're embarrassing yourself now. As somebody says here, who is this fellow, Lord Haw-Haw? Because that's what you're coming across as. Are you seriously suggesting that the Russians are... surely if they were winning, they said they would take Kiev in 2 days. They withdrew from Kiev, and now they've moved on to... They've regrouped, and they've gone to the Donbass region. Are you seriously telling me that you think the Russian invasion, or do you call it a special operation? I don't know. Do you think the Russian invasion of Ukraine... Well, I haven't asked it yet. Do you think the Russian invasion of Ukraine has gone as the Russians thought it would?
Well, the second caller you had in made a good point that nobody has that playbook for starters. We can pretend we know what the Russian sort of plan was. It certainly
so it's all gone swimmingly.
With 40,000 men to take a city the size of with 3 million people, that no military strategist in any country will tell you that is possible.
They had 150,000 soldiers on the borders of Ukraine. They had a 40-mile convoy of vehicles heading towards Kiev. The Ukrainians smashed that convoy. We've seen all the pictures of them, and we've got statistics, which presumably you don't believe, about the number of Russian soldiers killed, the number of generals killed, the number of tanks that have been destroyed. You think that's all fiction, do you?
I think it's fiction to believe that 40,000 Russian troops can take a city the size of Kiev.
Where'd you get 40,000 from? There were 150,000 of them.
Iain, that's what was deployed to Kiev. The rest were deployed to different parts of the east to shore up the Donbass, to go down towards Crimea and to encircle Mariupol. What you're talking about is the 40,000 that anchored the standing army of 100,000 troops in Ukraine who thought Kiev was going to be under attack. And all the Russians were doing were anchoring them there so that they could actually force their attack on the Donbass and get rid of the right-wing battalions, the Azov, the Sector K and all the rest.
What about the war crimes that have clearly been committed, the graves that have been dug and civilians have been shoved in them? You presumably also don't believe any of that. You think it's Western propaganda?
It's fog of war. I mean, propaganda, if Russia does it, so do we.
It's a war
crime.
Fair enough. No. There is no accusation that has happened by Ukrainian forces or indeed anybody else, apart from Russian forces.
Do you mean because we've banned anything that says something that's against the narrative? I mean, is that what you're saying? Because if you're saying that the only truth is what we're allowed to be published, then okay, fine. You can talk about the war crimes that we choose not to see. 8 years before Russia... I
asked you about Russian war crimes. Do you believe that they've committed any?
Well, for 8 years before February 2022, Ukrainians were killing Russians in Ukraine.
Question. Answer the question. Do you believe that Russia has committed any war crimes?
Do you believe war crimes can only be perpetrated by Russia?
Don't answer a question with a question. I want an answer. Do you believe any of the reports that Russia has committed war crimes?
I believe that
you don't, do you? You don't.
I
Just
believe
say
that Ukrainians... Well,
no, I'm not asking you about Ukraine. I'm not asking you about Ukrainians because you are a clear Russian sympathiser. You are promulgating Russian propaganda, which about 5 times during this call I've wondered whether I should even continue with it, but I have, because I think it's important that people realise that there are people like you who are quite happy to promulgate enemy propaganda.
You don't want to hear the other side of the conversation. That's cowardly. So let me make my point. 8 years before...
No, you're not willing to answer my question, so why should I?
I've already answered it. I've said
no, you haven't. I've asked you, do you believe that Russia has committed war crimes? And you won't say yes or no.
Well, now you're asking me to prove something that just now you said I have no evidence for it. I mean, how can I say, if I said yes, then you should ask me for the evidence of it.
Well, we've seen the evidence on our TV screens every night. We have seen the graves that have been dug. Do you think that they were dug by Ukrainians?
Ukrainians committing. Well, 8 years before we went in there, 8 years before the Russians went in there, we saw 15,000 Ukrainian Russians being slaughtered by the Azov, in the east. And which is what spawned the Russians to come in and defend Russian speakers after that part of
you think
Ukraine.
You think it's absolutely justified that Russia invaded Ukraine?
No, I do not. I just believe that Russia will defend Russia's interests and we will defend ours. That's exactly the way it should be. National interest is always defended by the country that's most at threat by that. So I think that if you are worried about war crimes, you should be worried about both of them, both sides perpetrating.
Yeah, but I've seen no evidence of Ukraine. I've seen no evidence of Ukrainian war crimes.
No,
it's not because I choose not to. There is no evidence there. And I'm going to, we've got to go to the news now anyway, but I think most people who've listened to this conversation will have wondered why I've gone on with it for so long, because you are clearly a Russian propagandist who doesn't believe anything that you are informed about by your own media. In the Second World War, you would have been arrested and put before a court for treason for some of the things that you've said in this in this call. But we have a different attitude now. We have free speech in this country. You've had about 6 or 7 minutes on this radio station, and everyone who's listened to you can draw their own conclusions, because I know I've drawn mine. Thank you very much for nothing.